Have you ever watched a toxic person get promoted, get chosen, get away with it, while you played by every rule and still lost? You did everything right. They did everything wrong, and somehow they're the ones smiling at the top, shaking hands, getting the benefit of the doubt they never earned. You've probably told yourself it was luck, or timing, or that some people just get away with things. But watch closely enough across enough years, and a pattern emerges. The same handful of moves used over and over by different people in different rooms, always working. That's not luck, that's a system. And once you can see a system, you can stop losing to it. What you're missing isn't talent, and it isn't even morality. It's what I call Machiavellian immunity. A way of seeing people so clearly, with such little illusion left, that nothing they do can quietly work on you again. Think of it as the difference between playing checkers and finally being shown the rules of chess. The board looks the same, but suddenly you understand why every move that used to blindside you was never random at all. By the end of this video, you will have 9 specific lessons drawn directly from the political mind of Niccolò Machiavelli that explain exactly how toxic people win and exactly how that stops today. Let's unlock exactly how they win and how that ends today. Before we go further, if you've ever watched someone toxic win at your expense and quietly told yourself, that's just how it is, type "I see it" in the comments right now. In the next few minutes, you're going to understand exactly why it happened and exactly what to do differently next time. Lesson 1. The mask always wins first. Picture your last performance review. The colleague who smiles in every meeting, who says, "Great job, team," while quietly taking credit for your work. That person got rated higher than you, not because their work was better, because their mask was better. Now, picture the same pattern somewhere far more personal. Think of the friend everyone describes as so much fun to be around, charming in the group chat, generous at every birthday, first to propose a toast, but alone with you behind closed doors. They mock the exact things you've told them in confidence, forget every promise they've made, and somehow, the moment you try to explain this to anyone else, you're the one who ends up sounding unreasonable. 2 completely different settings, exactly the same mechanism underneath. Here's why this works so reliably, and it isn't a flaw unique to gullible people. It's a feature of how every human brain is built. We didn't evolve in a world with background checks, verified reviews, or years to quietly observe someone's private character before deciding to trust them. We evolved in small tribal groups, where reputation traveled faster than fact ever could, and where trusting the visible public signal was for almost all of human history far cheaper and far safer than constantly doubting it. A toxic person doesn't need to outthink that instinct. They only need to feed it consistently in front of the right audience at the right moments, until the performance becomes indistinguishable from the truth in everyone's mind but yours. Machiavelli wrote it with unusual directness in The Prince. Everyone sees what you appear to be. Few know what you really are. That single sentence explains a surprising amount of why toxic people keep winning. They are not smarter than you. They are simply better rehearsed. And they understand something most people never pause long enough to question. That in most rooms, the audience decides what counts as true, not the evidence sitting quietly underneath it. There's a third version of this same pattern worth naming directly, because it's often the most damaging early dating and new relationships. Someone showers you with attention, compliments, and grand gestures within the first few weeks, calling you different from everyone else, promising a future neither of you has any real evidence for yet. It feels like proof of how special the connection is. In hindsight, months later, it's often revealed to be exactly the same mechanism as the coworker and the friend. A mask applied early and thickly, precisely because early masks are the hardest ones for anyone to question. The application here isn't to become fake yourself, and it isn't to become paranoid of everyone around you either. It's to stop confusing performance with proof deliberately as a practice. Start with 3 concrete habits. First, keep a private, unemotional, log even just mental notes of what someone actually does over a full month, completely separate from how their charm made you feel in the room. Second, whenever someone impresses you unusually fast, ask one filtering question. Would this exact behavior happen if no one important were watching right now? Third, treat every compliment and every promise as worth zero credibility on its own. Wait for it to be backed by at least 2 repeated actions before you let it change how you trust someone. But here's the uncomfortable part, and it's the part almost nobody warns you about. Recognizing a mask is only step 1, because the moment you see through it, you don't walk into safety, you walk straight into the next trap they've already built, quietly, long before you ever started paying attention. Lesson 2. The fox sees the trap you walk into. Think about the last time someone set you up to look bad. Maybe it was a meeting where you were blindsided with a question you were never told to prepare for, asked in front of exactly the people whose opinion mattered most. Or a casual conversation days earlier that turned out to be the quiet groundwork for building a case against you. You walked in like a lamb focused on doing good work. They walked in like a hunter who had already scouted the terrain for weeks. Here's a second version of the same pattern, one that's easy to miss because it feels friendly at the time someone asks you an innocent-sounding question. So what do you really think about so-and-so? In a low-stakes, relaxed setting. You answer honestly because it feels like a safe moment among friends. Weeks later, that honest answer resurfaces, twisted slightly, at the exact moment it can do the most damage to your reputation. You didn't lie. You didn't even do anything wrong. You simply didn't realize you were being interviewed, not chatted with. The psychological pattern underneath both examples is simple, and it's almost always underestimated. Toxic people plan the setup long before the event itself ever happens. While you're focused on doing good work, being a good friend, or simply getting through your day, they're focused on positioning who to tell what, in what order, in front of whom, and when. You're playing the game that's directly in front of you. They're playing 3 moves ahead in a game you don't even know has started yet. Machiavelli's most famous image captures this exactly, and it's worth sitting with for a moment, rather than rushing past it. The lion cannot protect himself from traps, and the fox cannot defend himself from wolves. One must therefore be a fox to recognize traps, and a lion to frighten wolves. Most good, honest people are only lions, strong, direct, transparent about their intentions. But strength without awareness just means you get caught in a trap you never saw coming, no matter how strong you are once you're already in it. Machiavelli isn't telling you to become deceptive. He's telling you that strength alone, without perception, is an incomplete defense. It's worth noticing how often this shows up in group settings specifically, not just one-on-one. A toxic person rarely sets a trap in a single conversation. They often spend weeks quietly seeding small, plausible-sounding doubts about you with 3 or 4 different people, none of which sound alarming on their own. By the time the actual trap closes, an entire room already half believes the story before you've said a single word in your own defense. That's not improvisation. That's a groundwork laid patiently, exactly the way a fox studies a field long before a hunt ever begins. The real-world action starts with a single habit before any high-stakes interaction with someone you suspect might be toxic. Pause and ask yourself one fox question. What does this person gain if I react badly or say too much right now? If the honest answer is, quite a lot, you've just spotted the trap before your foot is anywhere near it. A second habit notice: when a casual, low-stakes conversation is happening at an unusually convenient time, right before something important, that timing is rarely accidental. A third, get comfortable saying less in rooms and moments that don't require your full honesty yet. Being a fox doesn't mean lying. It means not handing someone the exact ammunition they're quietly fishing for. Seeing the trap is real power, and it will save you more times than you'll ever notice. But some traps aren't laid with lies or setups at all. They're laid with something far harder to guard against: love, trust, and the desire to be liked. And that's the one almost nobody sees coming until it's already too late. Lesson 3. Fear outlasts love. Here's a pattern almost everyone has lived through at least once. You were kind to someone, gave them the benefit of the doubt again and again, defended them when others doubted them out loud. And the moment it became convenient, they turned on you without a second of hesitation. Meanwhile, someone else you know, someone firmer, someone a little harder to read, even a little feared, rarely got tested the same way. People simply didn't push their luck with that person the way they pushed it with you. Widen the lens for a moment, and you'll notice this everywhere, not just in one relationship. The manager who's desperate to be everyone's friend gets walked over in every negotiation. The parent who never wants to disappoint their child ends up with the most defiant one. The partner who apologizes first every single time just to keep the peace ends up carrying the entire emotional weight of the relationship alone. In every case, the softness wasn't the problem. The absence of any real cost for crossing that person that was the problem. That's not a coincidence, and Machiavelli laid out the mechanism with a coldness that's honestly still uncomfortable to read centuries later. It is much safer to be feared than loved, for love is preserved by the link of obligation, which, because men are wicked, is broken at every opportunity for their own advantage. But fear preserves you by a dread of punishment which never fails. Read that twice. He isn't saying love is worthless. He's saying love on its own is an unreliable form of protection because it depends entirely on the other person's goodwill continuing to outweigh their self-interest. Fear, or more precisely, respect backed by real consequence, doesn't depend on anyone's goodwill at all. People who need to be liked are easy to exploit because their need for approval can always be quietly leveraged against them. All a toxic person has to do is threaten, even subtly, to withdraw approval, and the softer person folds. People with firm, consistently enforced boundaries are far harder to manipulate simply because there's no soft spot left to press. Look closely at any group of people you know well, and you'll usually find at least one person who's been quietly treated as safe to take advantage of for years. Not because anyone dislikes them, but because everyone has learned through repeated experience that there's genuinely no cost to doing it. And you'll usually find one other person in the same group who almost nobody dares to disrespect, not because they're unkind, but because everyone has learned just as clearly that there's always a cost. The difference between those two people is rarely talent or status. It's almost always this exact dynamic playing out silently over years. This doesn't mean become cruel, cold, or unkind. Machiavelli himself draws that exact distinction later, and we'll come back to it. It means stop outsourcing your entire sense of safety to whether people like you in any given moment. The action here has 3 parts. First, for 1 full week, simply notice, without judging yourself, every single time you soften or abandon a boundary, specifically to avoid being disliked in that moment. Second, pick one recurring boundary you've quietly let slide and hold it exactly once, cleanly, without over-explaining or apologizing for it. Third, pay attention afterward to who respects that boundary and who tests it harder. That reaction alone will tell you more about someone's character than months of pleasant conversation ever could. But even the firmest boundaries in the world won't protect you if you're still misjudging why people actually stay loyal to you in the first place. And that exact mistake is where Lesson 4 begins. Lesson 4. Loyalty bought by interest, not given by love. You've felt this before, probably more than once. A friend who was there for every good time, every celebration, every easy hangout, disappeared completely the moment you actually needed real help. Or a loyal coworker who defended you loudly publicly, enthusiastically, right up until defending you stopped being convenient for their own image, at which point their loyalty evaporated overnight, without so much as an explanation. Here's the part that stings the most. It's rarely dramatic. Nobody announces, "I'm no longer loyal to you." They simply become quietly unavailable, slightly slower to respond, a little more neutral in meetings, a touch more agreeable with whoever now holds more power than you do. The loyalty didn't break, it simply followed the incentive somewhere else, exactly the way it was always going to. The mistake most people make is assuming loyalty is primarily emotional, that if someone genuinely likes you, cares about you, enjoys your company, that feeling alone will hold under pressure. Machiavelli's observation is colder and considerably more useful precisely because of that coldness. Friendships that are acquired by a price and not by greatness or nobility of soul may indeed be earned, but they are not secured, and in time of need cannot be relied upon. In other words, loyalty that isn't rooted in genuine mutual respect, shared values, or real earned trust loyalty that exists only because it currently costs nothing, is loyalty that evaporates the instant the cost outweighs the reward. Toxic people are often experts at performing loyalty, precisely because they've quietly calculated, whether consciously or not, that it costs them nothing to perform, until suddenly it does, and the performance stops immediately. There's a specific moment worth watching for, because it reveals this faster than almost anything else. The instant someone new, more powerful, or more useful enters the picture. Watch closely what happens to the old loyalty in that exact moment. Not what's said about it, but what actually happens to how quickly they respond to you, how often they take your side, how willing they are to be seen standing next to you in public. Loyalty that was real doesn't shift the moment a more convenient option appears. Loyalty that was purchased with ease always does. Quietly, without ever being announced. The practical shift here is simple to describe, but takes real discipline to practice. Stop measuring someone's loyalty by what they say and how warmly they say it during easy, low-stakes times. Measure it only by what they actually do during expensive times, the moments when defending you, standing beside you, or telling the truth about you costs them something real, whether that's social standing, comfort, or opportunity. That is the only data set that has ever reliably mattered. As a concrete habit, whenever you're unsure about someone's loyalty, mentally replay the last time defending you would have cost them something, and be honest with yourself about what they actually did in that moment, not what you wish they had done. Once you start watching what loyalty actually costs someone, rather than what it costs you to keep believing in them, you'll notice something else almost immediately. The company a person keeps and how they treat the people who are no longer useful to them tells you everything you need to know, often before they've said a single word to you directly. Lesson 5. Judge them by the company they keep. Think of the last toxic person you dealt with closely. Now think specifically about who they chose to surround themselves with. Were they people of genuine substance? People willing to disagree, to push back, to hold them accountable? Or were they mostly people who flattered them, enabled every questionable decision, and never once challenged them, even when they clearly should have? That circle wasn't random, and it wasn't an accident of circumstance. It was a mirror built deliberately, whether the person building it realized it or not. Notice something else while you're at it. What happened to the people in that circle once they stopped being useful? Once they asked one too many honest questions, or once they simply had less to offer? Did they quietly get pushed out, replaced, or frozen out entirely? That pattern, who gets kept close and who gets discarded, and exactly why, is often more revealing than anything the person has ever told you about themselves directly. Machiavelli gave leaders this exact diagnostic tool, and it applies just as precisely to anyone in your personal life. The first opinion that one forms of a prince and of his understanding is by observing the men he has around him. You don't need years of direct interaction to understand someone's real character. You need one honest look at who they keep close, who they've quietly cut off, and what kind of behavior consistently earns a place in their inner circle. There's a pattern worth watching specifically inside that inner circle. Notice whose opinion actually changes the person's mind in real time, in the room, versus whose opinion is simply nodded at and then quietly ignored the moment the conversation moves on. People of genuine substance tend to be the ones whose disagreement is actually taken seriously, even when it's inconvenient. People who exist purely to flatter tend to be the ones whose agreement is loudly welcomed and whose disagreement, on the rare occasion it happens, is subtly punished. A slightly colder tone, a slower reply, a quiet distancing over the following weeks. The action here is straightforward, but most people simply forget to apply it. Next time you're uncertain about someone new in your life, a manager, a partner, a business contact, don't only evaluate them directly, one conversation at a time. Evaluate their inner circle as a separate, independent data source. Do the people around them seem genuinely free to disagree, joke at their expense, or challenge a decision out loud? Or does everyone around them seem to be performing, careful, slightly on edge? That single observation, made once, deliberately, often reveals in 5 minutes what months of pleasant, direct conversation would take far longer to uncover, if it ever did at all. But even the sharpest possible read on someone's circle of influence won't protect you if you still believe deep down that their promises to you carry real weight. And that exact mistake is where Lesson 6 begins. Lesson 6. The excuse is always ready. You've heard it before in one form or another. I said I'd help, but something came up. I know I promised, but circumstances changed completely. Toxic people are never, ever short on justification. And that's precisely because the promise was never really a binding commitment in the first place. It was a convenience, offered freely because it cost nothing to say, and honored only for as long as honoring it continued to cost nothing to do. Here's what makes this especially difficult to catch in real time. The excuses are almost always reasonable sounding, delivered with just enough sincerity and just enough detail to seem plausible in isolation. Any single broken promise on its own sounds like ordinary bad luck, a scheduling conflict, an emergency, a misunderstanding. It's only when you step back and look at 10 of them stacked together that the pattern becomes impossible to unsee. There's a specific trap worth naming here, the almost pattern. The help that almost arrived. The apology that almost sounded sincere. The change that almost happened. Toxic people rarely break every single promise outright. That would be too obvious, too easy to catch. Instead, they consistently deliver just enough of the promise to keep hope alive, while quietly withholding the part that would have actually cost them something. Watching for that specific gap between what was promised in full and what was actually delivered in practice is often more revealing than watching for outright broken promises. Machiavelli was remarkably blunt about this exact dynamic when discussing rulers and leadership. A prudent ruler cannot and should not honor his word. When doing so places him at a real disadvantage, and when the specific reasons that led him to make that promise in the first place no longer exist. Applied to everyday toxic behavior, this is nearly the exact playbook in miniature. Promises function as tools of the moment, quietly discarded the instant they stop serving self-interest, and immediately replaced with a new, reasonable-sounding excuse tailored to the situation. Here's the shift that changes everything. Stop evaluating people primarily by their promises, and stop giving new promises fresh credit every single time, as if the last broken one never happened. Start evaluating people almost entirely by their patterns instead. A promise costs nothing at all to make in the moment. A genuine pattern costs real years to fake convincingly. When someone's excuses begin forming a recognizable shape, always convenient, always well-timed, always just barely believable, that shape itself is the truth. Regardless of how sincere any individual excuse sounds. As a concrete practice, start keeping a private mental tally, not to build resentment, but simply to see clearly how many times has this specific person's word actually held versus how many times has it quietly dissolved the moment it became inconvenient. Once you stop trusting words on their own and start trusting only the pattern sitting underneath them, you'll realize something uncomfortable. Many of the people around you were never fooling you with outright lies at all. They were fooling you with something far quieter and far more effective: your own predictability. And that's exactly where Lesson 7 begins. Lesson 7. The simple are easy prey. Have you ever noticed that the same toxic person seems to know exactly how to push your buttons every single time, almost without effort? The same comment, the same guilt trip, the same tactic used over and over across years. It's tempting to assume this means they're unusually brilliant, almost gifted at reading people. In most cases, that's simply not what's happening. It's happening because you keep reacting the exact same predictable way, and they've simply learned through repetition exactly which lever produces exactly which result. Think about it honestly for a moment. Does the guilt trip actually require cleverness to work? Or does it work purely because it worked yesterday and the day before that, and every time before that, going back years? Most manipulation isn't sophisticated at all once you strip away the emotional charge around it. It's closer to muscle memory for them, and unfortunately for you as well. This is worth pausing on because it's genuinely counterintuitive that people who fall for the same manipulation repeatedly are very often intelligent, even perceptive people in every other area of their life. Predictability isn't a sign of low intelligence. It's simply a sign of an untested pattern. Nobody questions their own reflexes until something forces them to look directly at one. And toxic people, whether or not they could ever explain why, are remarkably good at locating exactly which reflex to press purely through years of trial and error with you specifically. Machiavelli's warning here is almost uncomfortably direct in how precisely it still applies today. Men are so simple and so much creatures of their immediate circumstances that the deceiver will always find someone ready to be deceived. Manipulation at its core isn't complicated. It survives and repeats because most people respond automatically, on autopilot, without ever pausing to ask why this particular reaction keeps happening in this particular situation. The action here is uncomfortable at first, but genuinely effective. Identify your single most predictable reaction, the one specific thing that reliably makes you cave, over-apologize, or quietly back down whenever it's triggered. Then, just once, deliberately do the opposite, not out of spite or anger, but purely out of unpredictability. Pair this with a second habit. After any interaction that felt oddly familiar, ask yourself directly, has this exact dynamic happened before with this same person more than once? The moment you consciously interrupt a predictable pattern, even a single time, the old script stops working cleanly because it was never built to handle a version of you that's capable of changing. But unpredictability on its own isn't enough if the world around you keeps shifting rapidly and you don't shift with it at anywhere near the same speed. That's precisely where fortune and the way toxic people exploit it comes into the picture. Lesson 8. Fortune favors those who adapt faster. Notice how toxic people rarely stay stuck for long, even after being exposed, even after clearly failing. When one tactic stops working, when one narrative falls apart, when one ally finally sees through them, they pivot almost instantly to another, a new story, a new alliance, a new approach entirely, often within days. Meanwhile, their targets are frequently still processing what just happened, still trying to make sense of the last incident, still emotionally stuck several steps behind. That speed genuinely isn't an accident, and it isn't some rare innate talent either. It's a learnable skill, one that can absolutely be used for good instead of harm. Once you understand what it actually is, consider how differently the two sides usually experience the same event. For the toxic person, being caught in one tactic is simply data confirmation that this particular approach no longer works. Filed away instantly, replaced within days by a new approach, built on the lessons of the last one. For the person who was targeted, the same event often becomes something to relive for months, analyzed from every angle, without ever quite converting into a concrete change in behavior. The gap between those two responses, one converts quickly into new action, the other stays stuck in reflection, is very often the entire difference in who ends up ahead a year later. Machiavelli wrote in a passage that's frequently misquoted and oversimplified that fortune is the ruler of half our actions, but she still leaves us to direct the other half. He also insisted in the discourses on Livy that whosoever desires constant success must change his conduct with the times. Put those two ideas together, and you get something genuinely useful. Toxic people succeed disproportionately, not because fortune favors them morally in any way, it clearly doesn't, but because they adapt their tactics at a speed that consistently outpaces how quickly good people update their defenses. Good, well-intentioned people often keep extending the exact same trust, the exact same patience, the exact same forgiveness, long after repeated circumstances have already proven clearly that it no longer serves them. The practical shift starts with a single habit repeated consistently after every encounter with a toxic pattern. Ask directly, what would I actually do differently the very next time this happens, starting today? Not next year, not after it happens 3 more times. Then, genuinely update your approach at roughly the same speed they update their tactics, rather than waiting for overwhelming proof before you're willing to change anything. This isn't about becoming cynical or toxic yourself. It's about refusing deliberately to keep fighting yesterday's exact battle with yesterday's exact strategy, simply because that's the strategy you're most comfortable with. Which brings us to the final and arguably most important lesson of all, because none of what we've covered matters if gaining this kind of clarity and power quietly turns you into the very thing you were originally trying to protect yourself from. Lesson 9. Power without cruelty. Here's the fear sitting quietly underneath everything we've covered today, and it deserved to be said out loud rather than left unspoken. If I actually learn all of this reading, masks, spotting, traps, holding firm boundaries, judging loyalty coldly, distrusting easy promises, don't I risk slowly becoming just as manipulative as the people I'm trying to protect myself from? It's a completely fair question, and to his credit, Machiavelli actually addresses it directly, even though this is the part of his work people quote far less often. In The Prince, he draws a careful, deliberate distinction between cruelty used well and cruelty used badly. Cruelty used well in his framing means applied rarely, decisively, only out of clear and genuine necessity, and converted quickly afterward into real, tangible benefit for the people around you. A firm boundary, set once clearly, that then allows genuine trust to rebuild on solid ground. Cruelty, used badly, means the opposite entirely, applied gradually, endlessly, growing steadily worse over time, serving no one but the person wielding it, with no clear endpoint and no benefit to anyone else involved. The same exact logic applies directly to everything in this video. Firmness used specifically to protect yourself, a boundary held clearly, once only when genuinely needed, is not remotely the same thing as manipulation used to exploit other people endlessly for personal gain, with no natural stopping point. One is a door closing to stop being taken advantage of. The other is a trap being built to take advantage of someone else. They can look superficially similar from a distance. They are not the same thing at all once you look closely. There's one final test worth carrying with you long after this video ends, because everything we've covered can, in theory, be misused. Ask yourself honestly whether applying any of these 9 lessons in a given moment is protecting something you already have or acquiring something at someone else's direct expense. Protection has a natural stopping point. The boundary is held, the trap is avoided, and life continues. Exploitation has no natural stopping point at all. It simply demands more, indefinitely, from whoever's being taken advantage of. If you can honestly answer that question each time, you'll rarely find yourself on the wrong side of Machiavelli's own distinction. Machiavellian immunity, as we've built it across these 9 lessons, was never about becoming someone who preys on others. It's specifically about refusing to remain someone who can always predictably be preyed upon. You now have the tools to see the mask instead of the performance, to spot the trap before stepping into it, to hold a boundary without collapsing it the moment someone frowns to judge loyalty by cost rather than by warmth, to stop lending credibility to empty promises, to break your own predictable patterns on purpose, and to adapt at the same speed the people around you do, all without ever becoming cruel, dishonest, or exploitative yourself in the process. That, in the end, is the entire difference between winning the way a toxic person wins and simply finally refusing to lose to one ever again. Let's bring all 9 of these together one more time plainly. They win with masks you've learned to weigh actions 10 times heavier than words. They win by setting traps 3 moves ahead. You've learned to think just as far ahead yourself. They win by exploiting your need to be liked. You've learned that firm, respected boundaries protect you more reliably than being agreeable ever could. They win by faking loyalty and handing out empty promises. You've learned to trust only patterns, never words on their own. They win by reading exactly how predictable you are. You've learned to consciously break the script, and they win by adapting faster than you do. So now, starting today, so do you. Which of these 9 lessons hit closest to home for you personally? Tell me the number 1 through 9 in the comments below. I read every single one. If this video gave you even one genuine moment of clarity about someone in your life, a coworker, a friend, a partner, even a family member, that clarity alone was the entire point of the last 40 minutes. Subscribe if you want more of this, not to become someone who preys on others, but to become someone who can never again be preyed upon quite so easily. Stay strategic, stay ethical, stay unbeatable.